a 1-meter pipe, a scooter, a welded door behind them. Strip away the war blogger, spin strip away the talk of covert infiltration systems and controlled subterranean logistics. And what actually happened beneath the steppe near Orikhiv was simpler and uglier than any of that. It was a handful of men folded into a steel tube barely wide enough to sit upright in pushing themselves through the dark on a child's scooter. Breathing stale air, counting kilometers they couldn't see, praying that the patch of daylight 13 kilometers ahead of them would be empty when they reached it. It wasn't empty. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The reason those men were sent into that pipe anyway, knowing the exit might be watched, knowing the entrance would be sealed shut behind them, knowing there would be no way to carry the wounded back. That reason isn't really about a pipe at all. It's about what Russia no longer has above the ground. It's about a kind of arithmetic that Moscow has quietly started running on its own soldiers, an arithmetic in which a man is cheaper than a shell. And once you see that arithmetic clearly, the entire southern front looks different than the maps suggest. So let's go down into the pipe. Let's follow those men through the dark, and then let's climb back out into the light and look hard at what this one small, almost medieval catastrophe is actually telling us about the largest land war in Europe since 1945. To understand why a 21st century army ended up crawling through plumbing, you have to picture the ground above it first. The Orikhiv axis in Zaporizhzhia Oblast is one of those places where the war stopped moving and started grinding. This is the same stretch of country where Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive bled itself white, trying to punch south toward Melitopol-Robotyne, the endless minefields, the shattered tree lines that changed hands a dozen times in a single summer. Orikhiv itself was a town of more than 14,000 people before the war. By this spring, only a few hundred remained in the ruins. The land around it is the defining feature, flat open, treeless, merciless. It is steppe. And steppe is the kind of terrain where anything that moves on the surface is visible, and anything visible can be killed. That single fact has quietly rewritten the entire war. In the open and daylight, a tank is no longer a spearhead. It is a target with a thermal signature, a 40-ton box that a $500 drone can find from a kilometer up. A column of armor is no longer a breakthrough. It is a row of expensive funerals waiting for an operator with a screen to notice them. The first year of this war was defined by the great mechanized thrusts, the armored fists driving deep into enemy lines, the way armies have fought since the Second World War. Most of those have died, not because the tanks ran out of fuel, but because the sky filled up with cheap eyes and even cheaper munitions, and the open field became a place where machines go to burn. So the war went looking for somewhere the eyes could not reach. It looked at the ruins, and it looked at the rivers, and finally it looked down. It went underground. And beneath the Orikhiv front conveniently ran something the Soviets had buried decades ago, a trunk gas pipeline, a meter across. Part of the old Shebelynka-Dnipropetrovsk-Kryvyi-Rih-Izmail transport system, a branch running toward Enerhodar and Melitopol, a relic of an energy network built in another century to carry gas to Europe, to keep European homes warm through Cold War winters. Now, it carried something else. Its entrance lay in Russian-held ground in the south. Its exits opened like the mouths of buried tunnels right beside Ukrainian defensive positions on the Orikhiv axis. To a planner bent over a map in Moscow, that pipe must have looked like a gift from the earth itself. A road the drones could not see, a seam in the front, a way to slip armed men into the enemy's backyard without ever crossing the killing fields above where the surface had become a slaughterhouse. The same hostile sky that had grounded the tanks could not look into a steel tube buried under meters of soil. It was a clever idea once. The trouble with clever ideas in this war is that they only stay clever until the other side has seen them. And seeing things, it turns out, is the one thing this war has gotten frighteningly good at. Here is what we actually know happened and where each piece comes from. According to Vladislav Voloshin, spokesman for Ukraine's Southern Defense Forces, speaking to Ukrinform, the Russians did not simply stumble into the pipeline and start walking. They turned it into infrastructure. Voloshin described an entire controlled system inside the pipe communication posts. Telephone lines, dugouts, shelters, even bypass tunnels engineered around the sections where the steel had been crushed or torn. They had trained for it, he said, at prepared grounds in the occupied territories, rehearsing the crawl before they ever attempted it for real. This was not a desperate improvisation by a few lost soldiers. It was a program planned and resourced from above. The assault groups entered on the Russian-held side and began moving toward the Orikhiv axis. The pipe was about a meter in diameter, 1,000 millimeters, according to the captured soldiers themselves. You cannot walk through something that size. A grown man cannot stand. So they sat, on small carts, on a scooter. And they pushed themselves forward kilometer after kilometer through total darkness and dead air, covering more than 13 kilometers underground before they finally neared the Ukrainian end of the line. And waiting above that end was the 65th Separate Mechanized Brigade, the Veliky Lu Brigade. Great Meadow, a unit raised in Lviv Oblast in the spring of 2022 that has fought this southern sector almost from its birth. It was the 65th that spearheaded the grinding assault toward Robotyne in 2023. It has held the Orikhiv and Huliaipol lines ever since. These are not strangers to this ground. They know every fold of it. And according to Voloshin, they had known about Russia's plans to use the pipeline for a long time. Not hours, not days. Long enough to prepare the ground around the exits in advance calmly on their own schedule. What they chose to do with that knowledge is the detail that lingers longest. According to Ukrinform, before the drones and the infantry went to work, Ukrainian troops scattered leaflets near the pipeline's exit points, surrender instructions laid out on the bare dirt where the Russians would emerge. Think about the psychology of that gesture. You only leave a man a printed invitation to give up when you are completely certain he is walking into a place from which he cannot escape. The leaflets were not mercy alone. They were a statement of total control. Then came the rest FPV drones, the heavy bomber drones the soldiers nicknamed Baba Yaga, after the Witch of the Folktales, and infantry engaging the assault groups one by one as they climbed up into the light. The 65th Brigade released video of the aftermath, and in it, the captured men speak. One of them described the sound of his own undoing. He heard the drones, the Baba Yaga, the FPVs fly off. Then, in the quiet that followed, he heard voices. At first, he could not place them. Then he understood they were Ukrainian. The hunt was already over, and he had simply emerged into the middle of it. And what these men described turns a dry battlefield report into something closer to a horror story, because they did not talk like soldiers who had been outmaneuvered. They talked like men who had understood somewhere in that 13-kilometer dark that they had never been meant to come back. This is where most coverage stops. It is where we start, because the pipe is not the story. The pipe is the symptom. The story is the disease beneath it, and the disease is logistics. Start with the geometry, because the geometry is the entire trap. A 1-meter pipe lets one man through at a time. That single physical fact dismantles everything an assault is supposed to be. You cannot mass force in a pipe. You cannot bring a vehicle, a heavy weapon, a mortar, a stretcher, a crate of shells. You move in single file, or you do not move at all. So whatever force Russia funneled into that tube arrived at the far end not as a fist, but as a thread. A thin, exhausted, strung-out trickle of individuals emerging one by one into the open in front of a brigade that knew the exact coordinate where each man's head would appear above the ground. Consider what that does to the basic logic of attack and defense. An ambush is a hard thing to spring on a moving army. The army has mass, it has firepower, it can turn and fight. An ambush is almost effortless to spring on a man climbing out of a hole alone, blinking in the light, with no idea what is waiting, and no room behind him to bring up help. The pipeline did not deliver an assault force to the Ukrainian rear. It delivered a sequence of isolated targets to a prepared kill zone on a schedule the defenders controlled. The attackers had handed the initiative to the people they were trying to surprise. Now the supply problem, which is worse than the geometry, and which is where the engineering verdict becomes brutal. Think about what an infantryman actually needs to do anything once he arrives. Water, ammunition, working communications, a way to charge a radio or a power bank, the ability to evacuate a wounded comrade. And above all of these, the main force coming up behind him, the reinforcements that turn a foothold into a breakthrough, a few men in a tree line into a hole in the enemy front. A Russian war blogger writing about an earlier pipeline operation near Sudzha spelled out the problem with a clarity Russian command apparently ignored. Food, water, ammunition communications, charging the approach of the main body, evacuating the wounded, 2 or 3 groups sitting in the enemy rear without any of that, he wrote, is a disaster. He was describing the fatal flaw in his own side's signature tactic. That is the verdict, and it does not care which flag you fly. A pipeline can deliver bodies. It cannot deliver an offensive. It moves men faster than it can ever move the things that keep men alive and fighting and connected. The pipe has no width for resupply convoys, no room to bring up the heavy weapons that would let a foothold hold no way to pass a casualty back towards safety. So the soldiers who survive the crawl arrive in the enemy's backyard already on a countdown, short of water, low on rounds radios, dying, no reinforcement possible, no way home. They are not an invading force. They are a leak. Which brings us to the single sentence that should change how you read this entire event. According to the captured soldiers, after each group entered the pipeline, it was welded shut behind them. Sit with the cold logic of that for a moment. You do not weld the door behind men you expect to bring back. You weld it behind men you have already written off. The seal is not a security measure to keep the enemy out. The enemy was at the other end. The seal faces inward. It is an accounting decision rendered in steel. It converts a soldier into a one-way expenditure, a body you spend to learn where the Ukrainian guns are to draw their fire to occupy a tree line for a handful of hours before drones erase it. The weld removes the one variable that might make a frightened man hesitate or turn around hope. One of the captured soldiers said it himself. It became clear they had been sent as cannon fodder, and everyone understood there was no way back. In most armies, that realization would be a catastrophic failure of morale. In this operation, it was the design working exactly as intended. So, why does Russia keep doing this? Because the alternative is gone. This is the part the maps cannot show you, and it is the heart of the whole thing. The armored assault, the tank, the infantry fighting vehicle, the breaching vehicle clearing the minefield, the rolling artillery barrage that walks ahead of advancing men, that entire toolkit has become suicidal in the drone era on open steppe. After 3 years of grinding war, Russia has burned through staggering quantities of armor, and what it can still field it increasingly cannot survive sending across fields where every meter is watched from above, and every vehicle is a thermal beacon. So the arithmetic shifts quietly and ruthlessly. If you cannot move steel across the surface, and you will not stop attacking, you are left reaching for the cheapest asset you still possess in abundance. Not shells, not tanks, men. And the pipe is simply the only road left that the drones cannot see right up until the moment they are sitting on the exit watching it like a hole in the ground. That is the confession buried under all the talk of clever subterranean systems. Pipeline warfare is not a Russian innovation to be feared. It is what remains after the innovations died. It is an army substituting flesh for the firepower it no longer has and routing that flesh through the one narrow channel. Its dwindling air cover and shrinking armored support cannot be asked to support. Every man on a scooter in that pipe is a statement about a tank that no longer exists, or a shell that was never fired, or a breakthrough that can no longer be bought with anything but bodies. And the reason it failed at Orikhiv is the same reason it will keep failing. A blind spot only works while it is blind. The first time Russia tried this at Zaporizhzhia during the fighting over the Kursk salient, it genuinely shocked everyone. Russian special forces in gas masks crept miles through a pipe that had until recently carried gas to Europe and emerged behind Ukrainian lines to help claw back lost ground. It worked because no one was watching the burrow. That window is closed. The Russians ran the same play near Avdiivka, around Kupiansk in the northeast in Sumy Oblast. And Ukraine adapted the way this war forces everyone to adapt or die. By April, a Ukrainian air mobile brigade killed 29 Russians attempting a pipeline infiltration in Sumy. On the 1st of May, 6 more were destroyed in a field as they tried to approach through a pipe. Ukrainian drone units now treat pipe exits the way a hunter treats a burrow they do not chase. What is inside, they sit on the hole and wait for it to come to them. By the time the tactic reached Orikhiv, the fourth known pipeline attempt of the year, according to Ukraine's armed forces, it had become a script with an ending everyone already knew. Men emerge, leaflets are waiting, drones and infantry close in. The survivors raise their hands. One of them reportedly told his captors that the Ukrainians treated him better than his own command ever had. So where does this go from here? 3 roads run out from the Orikhiv pipe, and they do not carry equal weight. The first road Russia reads the failure correctly accepts that the pipe has become a death sentence rather than a shortcut and quietly retires the tactic on the southern front. It is possible, but it runs against nearly everything we have watched for 3 years. Moscow has rarely abandoned a costly method simply on the grounds that it was costly. In its arithmetic, the men are the cheap input, and the cheap input is the one thing it still has. The second road, the pipeline gambit, goes quiet on this axis for a while, and Russia funnels its dwindling assault capacity into some other seam, a different blind spot, a different desperate channel, a culvert or a basement network or a stretch of broken ground. searching always for the next clever idea that will stay clever for exactly one battle before Ukraine learns to watch it too. The third road, and this is where I will put my weight, is continuation. More attempts in more places through more pipes and culverts and buried infrastructure even as the success rate collapses toward zero. Not because it works, because the thing that would replace it does not exist anymore. When an army still has the political will to attack, but no longer has the armor and the firepower to attack with it, does not stop. It substitutes. And the cheapest substitute, the one Russia still holds in volume, is the soldier himself. The pipe is not a phase. The pipe is what the bottom of the barrel looks like. Here is the mechanism to watch and notice that it is a mechanism, not a date, because forecasting the day of anything in this war is a fool's game, and the honest signal is structural. Track the ratio. Watch whether Russian advances on the southern front increasingly depend on small infiltration groups, 1s, 2s, and 3s slipping through gaps and tunnels and ruins, rather than on combined arms assaults with armor and artillery clearing the way ahead. The more the war tilts toward men without machines toward infiltration, as the main effort rather than a desperate supplement, the closer Russia is to the bottom that the Orikhiv pipe already pointed at. This is the chart that matters, and it is one almost no frontline map will draw for you. And now the exit condition, the thing that would prove me wrong, because a forecast you cannot disprove is just a prayer dressed up as analysis. If you start seeing Russia mass real armor again on this axis, if the breaching vehicles and the rolling artillery barrages come back, if the surface assaults resume at scale and crucially survive the drones long enough to take and hold ground, then the firepower crisis I have just described to you was overstated. The pipeline crawls would have been a niche experiment rather than a symptom of collapse, and this entire reading would be wrong. So watch the surface, not just the tunnels. If the steel returns and lives, I am wrong. If it does not return and the men keep going underground in 1s and 2s, then the pipe near Orikhiv was telling the truth about everything happening above it. So watch the ground above the pipe. If I am right, the coming months will not bring a great Russian armored thrust on this front. They will bring more small groups, more buried routes, more men sent one at a time into channels, their own side seals shut behind them, and a slowly rising body count that the maps will never quite capture because nothing visible will have moved. That is the signal to keep your eyes on, not a breakthrough, a trickle. A war fought one man at a time through holes in the earth by an army that has run out of better ways to fight. Because the men who crawled 13 kilometers under the Zaporizhzhia steppe were not the leading edge of something new and frightening. They were the proof of something ending. The welded door behind them was not a tactic. It was a verdict pronounced by their own command on their own value in steel. And an army that has to send its soldiers underground to fight and then seal the door so they cannot come back is not an army winning a war. It is an army that has run out of ways to keep fighting one and has decided to spend the only thing it has left. If this breakdown helped you see the front a little more clearly than the headlines do, share it with someone who only ever sees the headlines and subscribe so you never miss the next one.